Welcome to the Climb Podcast, where we are diving into taboo topics and redefining the rules for women of color leaders. Get ready as we share the stories and amplify the voices of extraordinary women of color, from navigating workplace challenges to celebrating triumphs. On this podcast, we've got you covered. So buckle up and join us as we embark on today's empowering journey. Welcome to the Climb Podcast, where we empower women of color in the pursuit of their leadership and managerial roles. I'm your host, Felicia Smith, the founder of the Climb, 501c3 organization committed to increasing the number of women of color in leadership and managerial positions. And every week on the podcast, we dive into taboo topics that are often not discussed in order to help women in their pursuit. And today is one of my favorite episodes, which is Her Climb, when we get the opportunity to talk to a woman of color who has climbed a lot of those mountains that we all are looking to climb and has a story to tell. And so today I'd like to welcome, I will say Mrs. Lisa Grant, but she's also my soror. Hello, Ms. Grant, how are you today?
Hello, I am doing well. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for coming. Before we get started, I'm going to read her bio and then we're going to jump right in. So Ms. Lisa P. Grant serves as the Deputy Clerk of the U.S. House of Representatives. In this role, she supports the legislative activities of the House of Representatives. She's seen daily on C-SPAN, on the floor of the House of Representatives, supporting members of Congress as they fulfill their constitutional duties. Her previous position was the Chief Procurement Officer for the U.S. House of Representatives. Prior to the USHR, she served as the Acting Commissioner for the Acquisition Management for the General Services Administration. While at GSA, she was named one of the top 100 women in government and technology by GovFresh. Her acquisition career spans nearly 35 years, procuring supplies and services from fuel to complex IT systems for DoD and civilian agencies. She is a member of the Northern Virginia Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority, where she serves on the Economic Development Committee. As an active member of the Northern Virginia Urban League Guild, she developed and managed their free SAT program for underserved students in her community. Believing it takes a village, Lisa became a part of the Befriend a Child mentoring program for at-risk youth in Northern Virginia. Her student, which she mentored since the 7th grade, was the first in her family to finish high school and will graduate with an associate's degree in May. Lisa serves as the deacon at Alpha Street Baptist Church, as well as a director on their church council. She holds a bachelor's degree in finance and a master's of science in management. She is a certified professional contract manager and a certified federal contracts manager by the National Contract Management Association. Welcome again. We have so many things in common. So I want to start off by saying how we met. And this was, guys, this was years ago. And you probably don't remember. I think I remember because I remember the thing that we shared in common. So we both are members of Alpha Street Baptist Church. And at the time, I was helping with new member orientation. And Lisa was a part of, was coming on as one of the people who were going to do new member orientation. And I met her there. And the thing that we connected on was I went to Tuskegee University and Lisa's from Tuskegee University, well, from Tuskegee. Wow. So I was super excited. And that had to have been at least 10 years ago. At least. At least. And so, you think so? 10 years?
Yeah, I think so, at least. Maybe a little bit more than that.
Yes. And so when I started the climb a year or so ago, I saw Lisa again at a Delta event. I used to be a part of the Northern Virginia chapter. And then when I moved, now part of the Loudoun chapter, and I saw her at an event. We had a high tea a couple of months, well, not several months ago now. And I saw Lisa and began to engage with her about this organization. And she agreed to be an executive champion. So we are so excited to have her, to be a part of this, to be able to continue the great work that she's already doing in the community. So yes, your bio says all the things. But what I find super interesting about your bio is it wasn't just Lisa did acquisition and then, you have 35 years of experience, but then you did this crossover to become the deputy clerk of the House of Representatives. Talk a little bit about your career journey and how you kind of navigated to get to the place you are right now.
So again, thank you so much. I'm honored to be a part of your podcast. I have over 35 years of experience in government. The majority of that experience is in the acquisition field. I started off as a contract specialist with the Defense Logistics Agency buying fuel for the depots. And realized probably after being there maybe 5 or 6 years that I had pretty much maxed out my learning potential in that organization. And I wanted to uh, broaden my acquisition career and learn more elements within the acquisition community. So I transitioned the from DLA to the U.S. Marshal Service and worked at the U.S. Marshal Service, became a contracting officer there, and bought court security services. But it gave me the opportunity to now purchase using cost type contracts versus when I was at DLA, I was only doing fixed price. So that kind of broadened um, my learning base for acquisition. And then I made a decision after being with the Marshal Service for about 5 years or so that I wanted to come back into DOD because they had a very intensive um, training program for acquisition professionals.
Yeah, they
I
do.
wanted to take advantage of that training program, and I wanted to continue to learn and grow as an acquisition professional. And it was when I transitioned back into DoD from the Marshal Service that I actually I came in as a contract specialist, maybe within 5 or 6 months, became a contracting officer. And within a couple of years, I was the director of acquisition. And so it was a fast moving, but I had the skill set, definitely had the technical skill set. And I had taken classes on managing and leading people. And as a contracting officer, you lead the contract specialists for the work that they're doing. So I transitioned very into the role. I was promoted into the role as the um, director of acquisition, director of contracting for that Army agency that I was working with. And from that point on, it just kept growing and growing and growing till I transitioned out of there into GSA as the director of acquisition, and then left GSA in 2015 to become the chief procurement officer for the U.S. House of Representatives. And in that role, I did the purchasing for members of Congress and the House officers, the Sergeant of Arms, the Clerk of the House. I was already in the Chief Administrative Officer. Those are the three officers of the House, but I worked under the Chief Administrative Officer, and it's just doing work for the Clerk of the House. Being seen doing various roles, having her talk to committees who had worked with me. And one day her current clerk was leaving and she needed a new clerk, and she called me. And
Wow.
that conversation was really interesting because she called me. I was during COVID. I might have been the only one in the office, might have had one other staff member there because we were very skeleton crew with people coming in the office. My phone rang. I looked at the phone. I saw it was uh, the clerk of the house. I answered the phone. Madam Clerk, how can I help you? She said, "You can come be my deputy." And
Wow.
so that was that kind of started the conversation. And a couple of months later, I transitioned over to being the deputy clerk of the U.S. House of Representatives. Now, I will share with your audience, it was not a position that I jumped at. She asked me, and it kind of took me back. I enjoyed acquisition. I had grown in that field, was a subject matter expert in that field, and I really enjoyed that field. And I really enjoyed the staff that was working with me in that field for the U.S. House of Representatives. So it was a tough decision to make to leave it, but it was the best decision that I made. And so in acquisition, you manage people, processes, and projects. In the clerk's office, I do the same thing: manage people, processes, and projects. So it was an easy transition. I had to learn their way of doing. I had to learn the legislative side and bills being introduced and managing the votes on the floor. But in the end, it's managing people, processes, and projects.
Yeah, you actually took the question because I was going to ask you what that transition was like. So you don't feel like it was a big leap, something completely different for you.
It was a big leap, but it was not a big leap that I didn't think I could do.
Got
So
it.
it was completely outside of what I was doing in managing and doing acquisition. And there was a learning curve, but the learning curve was just on understanding the business of the clerk's office.
Makes sense.
It was not on doing the business of the clerk's office.
Got it.
That I picked up on very quickly, learning the business of the clerk's office. The clerk, I mean, we've got 200 plus employees
Mm.
and all across the Capitol campus that do a myriad of things. And so it was learning what they all do. And then what my ultimate responsibility was in my role as deputy clerk and in my role as managing those employees.
That's awesome. You know what's interesting as you were going through kind of your career journey is it seems like at key and pivotal moments you decided to make a change in your career, whether that was going from defense to the US Marshals back to the defense. Like, what were some key things or indicators when that you knew it was time for you to make that next step to something that it sounds like was bigger and better and challenging you a little bit more?
That's a good question. And I spoke to some acquisition professionals at a leadership conference they were having in Houston a couple of back in the spring. And someone asked that question. And I said to them, I lateral to learn. My whole focus was on learning something new and different. Because in acquisition regulations change fairly often. So there's always something new that they're doing. They're going from commercial items, they're doing streamline acquisition. I mean, there's so much to learn. And when I realized that I had accomplished what I needed to accomplish at my current agency, I then moved and did some research to see what other agencies were doing and moved over to those to learn and grow. And a lot of people stay where they are because they become comfortable. I never became comfortable. You
That is good.
can't be comfortable in where you are. You've got to always be looking to learn, to grow, and to move. And I'll tell you, even if I don't think I've ever moved somewhere that I thought, oh my God, this was a mistake, because I was very strategic in what I did. I just didn't jump around. I knew what that organization was working on. And so I said, oh, this is something, I'd like to learn to do, or I
Mm.
can enhance my skills if I did this. I can hone my skills in this area where I need to be strengthened in because they're working in that area. Uh, I never, I never jumped around, and my decisions, like I said, were very strategic. I knew where I was going, and I knew what I what I wanted to accomplish. And when I felt I accomplished it, I start moving to see where else I could grow.
So when you started out as a contracting specialist, did you ever think like, hey, I want to be an executive, I want to be in the executive ranks, I want to be a senior? Was that ever a thought as you were journeying in your career?
Not as I when I started off as a contract specialist, it was not.
Okay.
Um, Probably after being in acquisition for maybe 10 years and becoming a contracting officer. Because when you're a contracting officer, you start leading teams. So that starts your growth as an executive
Mhm.
or as a leader within the organization. And then as you lead teams, then the next natural transition is to a supervisory position. Now, I will
Mhm.
tell you, you got to be ready to supervise
Oh, yes.
because it's not for the faint at heart.
Hmm.
But my first job as a supervisor was when I became the director of contracting for the U.S. Army Intelligence and Security Command.
Wow.
And I had a staff maybe about 23, diverse staff, age, educational background, experience, and you've got to meet the needs of each employee individually,
That's good.
not as you can't group them all together and say everybody's got to do it this way. That's not how you lead people. You've got to have that personal relationship individually with that employee, and that's how you help that employee grow. And when I was a contracting officer, I realized that because I might have been working with some junior contract specialists. Some were could catch on pretty fast. Some were a little slower. So I've got to meet them where they are. And
Yeah.
that's the same thing you have to do with, that's the same thing I had to do with employees when I first became a supervisor.
You just actually gave a gem about leadership, and I love that we're talking about this because, part of what we're doing here is trying to grow and develop leaders.
Mhm.
Going into that leadership position, besides that key piece that you just said, what are just a couple more things you think people or women of color need to know about leading? Like, if you're going to be successful at leading a team, what are some things that they could be working on before they even take on that first supervisory position?
So I would say that one, you've got to be a people's person.
Hmm.
You can't be introverted and try to lead people. You've
Hmm.
got to be uh, personable. You've got to work well with others. You've got to be able to give instruction. You've got to be able to give constructive criticism. And you've got to be able to say, I want to move this person from where they are to this point. Because the
Hmm.
goal of a leader is not when you leave an organization, you shouldn't, or when you're in an organization, you should always be working to better your employee. The
Hmm.
employee comes first. I would always say, if I support and stand beside my employee and I get them to where they need to be, they'll do anything.
Yeah.
I don't have to ask them to stay late. I don't have to ask them to take on a new project. They will do it because they've got somebody that's supporting them and standing by it. So you need to be a people's person. You need to have communication skills. So as you're looking to go into leadership, look to take courses on business writing, on oral speaking. You got to have eye contact with people. Look to work with or learn to manage up because
Hmm.
everybody's got a boss, right? So you got to
Yes.
learn to manage up. And even if you're not in a leadership position, you manage up from where you are. So
Absolutely.
you learn to work with those who are your coworkers or those who may be a level above you.
Yeah.
And that's what helps lead. You've got as African American women, um, we've got to hone our skills so that there's no question that we
Yes.
belong in this spot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate, but very true. So
Mm.
it's not something that we can ignore. It's not
Right.
going to change. It's
Right.
not going to change at all. No,
Mm.
that is good. So tell me, what did sponsorship look like in your career? And we'll just add on mentorship. What did mentorship and sponsorship look like in your career?
Well, interesting question. Someone asked me a few months ago, what would you do different? And my first response was, I would probably have a mentor early on in my career.
Mm,
Because a lot of times when you start off, you're head down, just trying to do the work, just trying to show I can do it. I'm supposed to be here. But there's always somebody who's done it and can help
mhm.
you along the way. I probably didn't have my first mentor until I was in a supervisory position.
Wow.
When I was the director of contracting for the U.S. Army Intelligence and Security Command, was when I had my first mentor. And then I established relationships and connections. They might not have been called a true mentorship, but they were people I could call to say,
Yeah.
"Hey, I've got this situation. How would you how would you handle it? Or have you seen this before?" So I think we always got to have somebody we can reach out to. And that person could be at your same level. It may be a level above you. It may be a level below you.
Mm-hmm.
You reach out, but have somebody that you can reach out to. So I could always reach out when I started my mentorship um, back when I was the director of contracting. I could reach out to that person, excuse me, for guidance on different situations. Even after she left the organization and I left the organization, we stayed connected um, in order to continue to grow, for me to grow in my area.
Oh, that's great. It's so good because to your point, it's so important to have somebody, whether you call it a mentor or not, someone that can help to guide you. And it often is. It could be someone who is either your colleague and peer or someone who is actually below you who can teach you a lot more than you think. So over the course of the years, we talk a lot about sacrifices and trade-offs that we have to make in order to be successful in our careers. Were there any particular trade-off sacrifices that you felt like you had to make in your career in order to make it successful?
Well, certainly my career trajectory was different um, pre-children than and post-children.
Let's
Um,
talk about
I
it.
made the decision that no matter what position I'm in, that I needed to be there for my son.
Mhm.
And even going into a position, my leadership knew I had a young son at the time. And, occasionally I've got to be available for him. If he has an event at school, I need to be at school because he doesn't understand, well, mommy's got to work late. What he realizes is she's not here.
Mhm.
And I never wanted him to have that feeling. So um, I I think for me, I didn't really have any trade-offs. I went into every position and had that honest conversation.
Yeah.
So everyone knew, uh, Nicholas came first. And
Mhm.
if there's something that's going on, she needs to be there, she will be there. Now, if that meant, I had to be at school for an event, but I still had something I needed to get done, then I did it after the event. So that might be the trade off, but I was always there to support him and my husband or any other civic or things that I was doing. I wanted to make sure that I had a well-rounded life and quality of life. I have some former employees that will tell you. In fact, I had one that retired recently, and said when Lisa came in as our director of acquisition, she called us all in, at a meeting, about, let's say about 30 people. And I said to them, I put God first, then my family, and then work, in that order. And I will not change that order. And she said, I never heard anybody say that.
Yeah.
I had never heard, and she's especially not a Black female. I had
Mhm.
never heard anybody say that. And when you said it, in her head, she thought, "Oh, this is going to be good,"
That's
because
good.
that's that's the way she felt, but she never verbalized it. But after
Hmm.
I verbalized it, she came and sat in my office. She said that I have never heard anybody say that. I always felt she was very active in her church. She said, I always felt I had to, step kind of lightly on the things I had to do. She was, active in her nephew's life and she wanted to be there for him. And I said, and I told her, I said, let me tell you something. I'm having a conversation with you, but if my son calls me on the phone, you're going to have to step out because I
I love it.
about that. So, certainly, there are trade-offs. I mean, I've had some very late nights because I had to step away and be a
Yeah.
part of something, either he was doing or some other commitments I had, but I still had work. Work still has to be done. And
Mm.
so you just have to learn to manage it all.
Yeah, no, that's good. I love that. And you probably are, we often don't have those tough conversations. I don't even actually call them tough conversations, real conversations about where you are in your life. And I
Right,
tell, my mentees the same thing, like say it out loud. When I start a new position, I do the same thing. I go in and say, I have a son, he's 8 years old, he's special needs. So I'm gonna have to work it. Now, no,
right.
I'm always, and when I'm here in the building. I am here with you 100%. But if I gotta go, gotta go.
Yeah, yeah,
I
that,
think people
that's real.
appreciate that honesty. They like
Right,
appreciate if you just put it out there as opposed to trying to hide it. And then they're
right,
like, wonder why she's running out here every day at 4 with
right,
sneakers on because she's
right.
trying to balance both of those things. And so I
And I've
think,
had executives that I work for to this day, who, previous executives that'll ask me, how's Nicholas doing? Because they knew how important he was in my life.
yeah,
And they would keep up on, how was the game last night or how was the concert last night? Because they knew that was important to me. And because it was important to me as a leader, it became important to my employees. So they didn't feel uncomfortable when they had to go out, leave for a ball game early. I actually had one employee who was in the office and I went up to talk to him and I said, "Hey, I thought you told me your son had a double hitter tonight." He said, "Yeah, well, the first game's at 4, but I don't leave till 6, so I'll miss the first game." I said, "No, you won't miss the first game. You need to go."
yeah.
Because you never know what may happen in that first game, and you don't
Hmm.
want to miss it. Go. And he kind of looked at me and he packed his stuff up and he went
Yeah.
off. And so I think as a leader, you have to that goes back to you got to put the people first.
Yeah.
You lead from behind.
Hmm.
You put the people ahead of you, and you never have to worry about the work again.
Absolutely, because he'll never forget that moment, and he's always gonna be loyal to you as a leader
Right.
because you saw him as a person first,
Exactly.
and instead of a not as of a product or somebody who's producing, he's a person. So,
Right.
yeah, that's so key, and so important. So question,
Mhm.
at what point in your career did you think to yourself, or have you thought to yourself, "You know what? I've broken some glass ceilings, or I've shattered some glass in my career." Have you ever thought about that as you've taken on these amazing assignments, and done a lot of things that a lot of us look up to?
I didn't think it until I became the chief procurement officer for the U.S. House of Representatives. I didn't realize when I came into that position that I was the first African American to do it and the first female to do it.
Wow.
And so it was a double whammy, right? Um, but in that role, unfortunately, we don't have room to mess up. So someone asked me, did you ever have imposter syndrome? And I said, no, because I would never accept a job that I think I couldn't do 100%. That
Mhm.
I would not, I could walk in that room and know I'm the ace in the room, not the jack. I
Got it.
always, I always went into positions knowing that I could do the position. When I was hired as the chief procurement officer, I was hired based on my skills, my technical skills, and my leadership skills. They went through and they had my resume. I went through a panel of two or three. I guess the first interview panel was about 5 or 6 people. Then the second one was in the Capitol. I mean, I got the position based on my skills, technical skills, and leadership skills. But now I got to prove it.
Mhm.
And so I was always still in that position, learning and growing so that I can ensure that I was always at the top of my game. I was always the subject matter expert on acquisition, which is why I have the 2 certifications. I mean, you sit for those certifications like you do a CPA exam. They
Yeah.
are not easy. But
I
I
actually want you to go into that a little bit, and I hate to cut you off, but as you were, I don't, I want the audience to appreciate the amount of training that goes into being a contract officer. I want you guys to know this is not something like, oh, I just study for a test.
oh
No, there's
no.
a lot of training. Can you talk a little bit of what is required to be a contracting officer?
To be a contracting officer is a combination of in classroom training and on the job training. And depending on what agency you're in, your on the job training will differ. So some agencies only perform fixed price contracts. So your training on the job is definitely different than those who are evaluating cost elements. That's a different type of training. But because you are ultimately, the contracting officer is ultimately responsible for the award of the contract. I mean, your name is the one going on that dotted line. You need to have a, the leadership, the acquisition training, and extensive on the job training. And so in federal acquisition, you are either what they call FACC certified levels 1 through 3, and DoD is levels 1 through 3, but it's called DAWIA. Uh, there's a lot of training and on the job training that goes behind in order to get to those different levels of certification. Then on my own, and like others, I decided to sit for the National Contract Management Association's highest certification in contracting. Now, the highest certification is the Certified Professional Contract Manager, which you typically take the test after you've become a certified federal contract manager. But I did it in reverse. That's just how I
Really?
did stuff. Yeah. So I decided, oh, I want to be a CPCM.
Mhm.
I took a online training class, 10 or 12 week online training class that's helping prepare you for the test. Then I took a in-person training. Um, that in-person training might have been 6 or 8 weeks. I think it was a couple of days a week in the evening, so that I could be prepared to sit for that exam. The exam, I think, is about 4 hours long, and
Wow.
it covers every element of contracting, professional contracting, and the I'm not sure if they still do it this way, but they tell you, okay, you're going to have, let's say, 5 questions on contract types and 10 questions on this, and so you kind of know where oh, I need to, I've got the bulk of the questions are coming from this area. Let me make sure I am aware of what's going on in that area. So you take the test. So I took the test, passed the test, became a certified professional contract manager. And then maybe a couple of years later, I thought, well, I'm still in the federal government. Let me go back and
Yeah.
take the certified federal contract manager. Certainly that test is not as hard as the professional test because it really is, you go from one up to the other one. And so I decided to get that certification as well. And in order to maintain that certification, you've got to have a certain number of training classes every year. Well, you have to have a certain number of training classes within a certain year radius in order to maintain it. And so I still do that. Even though I'm not in a acquisition position, I still maintain those certifications.
Yeah. I know I've kept you for a while, but I want you to talk a little bit, just real quick, about, the importance of particularly Black women in certifications. Number one, like having, not just worked in an area, but leaning on these certifications to show another level of due diligence like you did. Like, how important is that?
Well, it's just like having an undergraduate degree and then having a master's degree.
I like that analogy.
It's the same thing. It shows continuous growth in the process. And so for the contracting certification, they're not, everybody's not a CPCM. But when people see it, they think, oh, okay, wait a minute. She's got that certification. I occasionally look at senior level position descriptions in the private sector who are recruiting for directors of acquisition or heads of acquisitions department, and I will say probably 90% of them mention having a CPCM.
Mm,
Desired skills, uh, X number of years of acquisition experience, CPCM. So it's a recognized certification that as a just one as an acquisition professional, I think all acquisition professionals should strive for it. But as an African American female, sometimes you got to have more than the next guy,
yeah. Yeah.
and having that behind my name says she put the work in.
Yeah. I like that. I like that. So I'm going to end our interview with one question. What would you tell a young lady who's starting out today in her career? Let's say she just graduated, she's just starting. If you had to give her or part some words of wisdom to her, what would you leave her with going into the workforce?
I would say, whatever your field, strive to be the most knowledgeable person in the room in your field.
Yeah,
Learn what you're doing before you try to move to the next level.
agreed.
Hone those skills and look for ways to better your soft skills, your
Yes.
interpersonal skills, you're working well with others, you're being a team player, you're being an active listener. Learn those skills because they will come in handy. And always remember, somebody is always watching.
Yes.
So take it from a person who was sitting at her desk doing her job as a chief procurement officer, getting a call from the clerk of the house saying, please come be my deputy, because she was watching.
That's good.
And so always remember that. So what does that mean? Someone's always watching. Always be professional.
Yes.
Always make sure that the conversation that you are a part of, they're professional conversations. And if they aren't professional, just politely excuse yourself from them.
Mhm.
Always remember someone is watching. And I'll end with this. You're just as good, if not better, than anybody in the room.
That's great.
And you have to remember that. Hold your head up high, look people in the eye, because you are there because you belong there, and conduct yourself in that way.
I love that. So, Grant, thank you so much for being a part of this podcast and for imparting your wisdom. If you would like to share with the audience, where can they find you if they want to connect with you?
So I'm on LinkedIn. Please feel free, Lisa P. Grant. I'm on LinkedIn. Send me a LinkedIn request. I'd be happy to accept. You can find me on Facebook, Lisa P. Grant. You can find me on Instagram, just Lisa DST on
All right.
Instagram. So please reach out. Would love to chat with some of you all and continue to share and connect.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you, audience, so much for listening. Continue to follow us. We are on our new YouTube channel, Join the Climb. You can follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook, also at Join the Climb. On Facebook, it's Join the Climb 1. But until next time, keep striving and keep growing. And I'll see you next week. Thanks for tuning into the Climb Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review us on wherever you listen to podcasts. For updates and behind-the-scenes content, make sure you're following us on Instagram and LinkedIn at Join the Climb. Until next time, keep climbing and keep thriving, sis. See you next episode.